Holly Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a short call in part two, and I want to address some of the debate that's been had so far. About the one of the key issues in the debate so far about this idea of having a minimum prescription of affordable housing as a criteria for a qualifying development. And then I also want to talk about the regulation-making powers and the transitional powers that are set out both in Part 2 and in Schedule 2 of the bill, which we are also debating this afternoon. But first of all, can I thank the Minister for being here and being in the chair and taking some calls on this. It's good to have the Minister responsible for the legislation through the committee stage and actually engaging with the debate. I wish we saw it happen more in this House. But I want to address what he spoke about when he got up most recently and quoted from the bill looking at the minimum provision of affordable housing. And to give some credit to the Minister, it's true, and I can see here in the supplementary order paper the track changes version of which has been put on the table of the House, that there is now an ability for, through Order in Council, one of the qualifying development criteria to be a minimum provision of affordable housing or a percentage of affordable housing. So that's good to see, but my question for the Minister is, why not go the whole hog? Why not put it in the legislation as a requirement for a qualifying development rather than putting it in as something that can be done through an Order in Council? Because if the purpose of the bill is to increase the supply of affordable housing, which we've established in the earlier debates on earlier parts of the bill that it is, then why would you create a special housing area if not to improve the supply of affordable housing? And if you want to improve the supply of affordable housing, why would you not include a minimum percentage in that special housing area? If you can, if the powers are going to be inserted into the bill, why not make it a standard criteria that apply to all special housing areas, if indeed the purpose is to increase the supply of affordable housing? And I want to use the example of Hobsonville, because Hobsonville is really what this bill could enable. It could have enabled. And under the previous government, as we've heard from other speakers, it was a very good model of using Crown land to establish a new housing development that was mixed. It was mixed. It was a mixed development with a proportion of affordable housing, a proportion of social housing, and in fact that's another question that perhaps this bill fails to address, is that there's no requirement for any minimum provision of social housing in any special housing areas, which is also a very important part of the housing affordability question, social housing. No provision for that either. But what Hobsonville could have been and was intended to be when it was set up was indeed a special housing area of a sort with a mixed provision of housing, with a provision of affordable, social and private housing. And what happened with the change of government was we had a Prime Minister who happens to be the local MP who said it would be, quote unquote, economic vandalism to have state houses in his nice, comfortable electorate. And so those provisions were removed from the requirement for the development at Hobsonville. It's a good development, you know, I've been and had a look at it. It's exciting. There could be great prospect for other such developments, but it's a great shame that we allowed a Prime Minister to say it would be economic vandalism to have social housing in that area, and that we allowed the provision of the gateway loans to be reduced so that only 17 families got to use one to purchase a house in that development. And if we put into this bill a criteria, made it a qualifying criteria for qualifying developments that there had to be a minimum percentage of affordable housing in new special housing areas, then what we could see is a lot more areas like what Hobsonville was supposed to be when it was first mooted, Mr. Chair, and it's a great shame that we have not done that. And I don't think putting it in as a possibility for an Order in Council, as this SOP does, is enough. Now, Mr. Chair, I want to turn my attention to the regulation-making powers and the transitional provisions in the bill, because we heard from a number of submitters at the Select Committee and indeed from the Regulations Review Committee that in addition to the unpopular override provisions in the bill delegates a high level of regulation-making power to ministers which may not be justified. And we in the Green Party very much share those concerns. And while it's true that the Select Committee did, to the best of its ability, take the concerns of the Regulations Review Committee, Mr Chair,
Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr Chair, into account and take them seriously, and there are some changes recommended by the Select Committee to modify those powers, those regulation-making powers, and then those transitional provisions, we remain concerned at the level of power that this bill concentrates in central government over local decision-making. It's something that we've only seen in recent years in emergency legislation, and the model, of course, is the legislation around Christchurch earthquake recovery. And I've been concerned for some time, and this legislation plays out that concern, that having established that precedent through the Christchurch earthquake recovery legislation for that extensive use of regulation-making power, that extensive use of order in council, that extensive use of transitional provisions, that we would begin to see creep into other legislation in non-emergency situations. And indeed, I believe that we have in this House seen the increasing use of those kind of provisions by this government in various types of legislation, and this is another example. Now, while New Zealand is absolutely experiencing a housing crisis, and many speakers have spoken about that in the debate so far this afternoon, and I would concur with all of those who have done so, it is not yet a national emergency. We could get there, Mr Chair, and I doubt that this bill will help to prevent that coming catastrophe, but we're not yet at the point where we can call the housing crisis a national emergency. And therefore, that high level of ministerial power and intervention, that high level of delegated regulation-making power, that excessive reliance on transitional provisions is not justifiable in our view. Instead, Mr Chair, what the Green Party believes is that we need a more considered national plan to tackle housing affordability. And such a plan would treat housing as core national infrastructure. And it's a debate that I think we need to have as a country to actually turn our way of thinking about housing away from it as a solely private and personal asset and good to national infrastructure, because it has some of the most significant bearing on the health and well-being of our population. Much more so than roads, Mr Chairman, or other things that we currently consider as core national infrastructure. Our housing stock has a huge bearing on the health and well-being of our population. And so we need to start seeing it as core national infrastructure and develop a concerted plan to treat it as such. Now, that would focus on the increasing the supply of affordable housing, both social housing and affordable rental and housing to buy. And it would need to be developed in true partnership with relevant territorial authorities, not with the kinds of provisions in this bill which override them. And the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Bill, unfortunately, is no such plan. What we would like to see is a national housing infrastructure plan that looks at things like a capital gains tax exempting the family home, like a systematic government build program that isn't just building and knocking down Housing New Zealand houses at the same rate that they get built, which is what the government's doing at the moment, like a progressive ownership or shared equity scheme that helps families into their own home without having to go through the conventional route of a deposit and a mortgage, like secure tenure for renters, like a rental warrant of fitness, and like restrictions for non-residents and non-citizens for purchasing homes in New Zealand. Now, those are the kinds of measures that we could put into a national housing infrastructure plan that would truly tackle the crisis of housing affordability and housing quality that we have in this country before it gets to national emergency status. As it stands, Mr Chair, we can't support this bill. We're not convinced that the regulation makers and making powers and transitional provisions are warranted at the present time, and we can't understand, if you think that affordable housing is an important criteria, if you think that a minimum percentage of affordable housing is an important criteria, why not write it into the bill? Thank you, Mr Chair.
Honourable Annette King.
Mr Chairman, I think it's obvious that the